G'day, ZiggyD here. We have it, the Path of Exile 1.2 Forsaken Masters passive skill tree. Now this is been labeled the tentative passive skill tree. Things will most likely change in the lead up to Forsaken Masters, but this is pretty much what we're going to be playing around with, and this gives us an opportunity to look at the changes and start planning our builds. Now, this thing is massively different from the previous path, the previous tree. This is not just like, you know, the Marauder changes or even the addition of the Scion, which was a pretty big change. This is bigger than all of that combined. The whole tree is pretty much a new game. It's a new game overall, and like I think pretty much everyone who started playing around with this is like, how do we even build our characters? Like, there's so much we don't know, but we can start exploring things. We can start practicing building characters, and I've managed to put together a few characters now that may or may not work in the new leagues and things like that. In this video, I want to go over just a sort of like a top level overview of the changes to the tree, sort of start to familiarize you guys with the passive skill tree. And in subsequent videos, I will show you guys some of my plans for different characters, for rebuilding some of my old characters, and also maybe some general guides to the tree, like how you have to go about, some tips to how you go about building your characters and things like that. So let's start off with some of the sweeping big changes to the passive skill tree. And of course, if you guys want to look along as you as you listen to this video, I will put down in the description below a link to the most recent and updated version of the passive skill tree planner. So there's a couple really big sort of design choice changes with the tree, and you'll see a lot of this as I pick apart the Ranger and Shadow and Witch areas. But it kind of falls into two parts. Firstly, there are no boring clusters anymore. Every cluster has been given a notable, and every notable has been given a cluster. And you'll see this a lot. A good example is probably something like Arcing Blows. Previously, these were just a single notable passive sitting by themselves. These guys now have extra weapon elemental damage. And things like the previous Celerity cluster, which was just a cluster of 3 move speed nodes that no one really ever got, has now been made much more interesting with the addition of notables, and then also making a lot of more hybrid nodes. You'll see a lot more as this as well. This is kind of a doubled example just here. So much value. You'll see this is attack speed, move speed cluster now, so there's both of those things in there. You'll see a lot of accuracy has had the same sort of treatment, and across the board there's just a lot more interesting hybrid sets of nodes, and you'll see here, like, here's another good example. This is a life mana cluster before, it is now a life energy shield cluster with this notable here with a lot more on it, and often the notables will have extra interesting effects as well. Another overarching change is the decision to make the cluster routing more interesting and give you more decisions. The best example is up here in the Witch, where you can go up either the left hand side or the right hand side. This is an example of split options, so this is one part of this. Split options, you can go at 1 for pure damage or 1 for ignite, and I'll go over that in the Witch section. And we also have some cases where it's more efficient to go one way. You can get to the end point quicker, but you get maybe less of the things you might want. So for example, we have the Piercing Shots cluster just here. On the left hand side, you can go through only 3 nodes, and it takes just a bit of projectile damage essentially. So you can spend less passives to get the notable if you really want the notable. Or you can take the right hand side and spend 1, 2, 3, 4 and get, you know, a bit extra of the stuff, extra projectile piercing through going through that side. So you have the option of whether you want to invest more heavily or whether you don't want to invest more heavily. Another good example here is the Mana Leech node Mind Drinker has now been added onto a mana cluster. So you're kind of getting, you know, if you're obviously having mana problems, you want more mana, and mana has become more attractive across the tree as well. And same thing with, there's an extra Blood Drinker node here, which has the same sort of deal. It's on a life cluster as well. So there's a lot of that, a lot of those interest changes, and the tree overall feels much more interesting, and each of the different clusters feels very attractive, and it's very, very difficult to plan builds that lie within that 110, 120 point limit. So this is pretty good stuff. The Witch area has been massively overhauled. She looks very, very different. Kind of cool. This is just all this triangular shapes going on in here. And then you'll notice the top section of the tree is completely different. All of this area that you had to travel through before that was pretty rubbish and no one really used is completely gone. It's all been shifted around to different areas, split up, broken, new passive clusters created and stuff. Just, it's completely different pretty much. So you'll notice that like things like Hex Master are gone, Whispers of Doom are gone. Those have been moved to different locations. So we can type in, for example, Whispers of Doom here, and this is the cluster up here. You'll notice there's a few of these clusters around the tree, curse effect clusters and curse clusters with the notables separated out into different areas. So for example, Whispers of Doom here, enemies can have one additional curse. This is now a notable rather than a keystone, and it comes with its own cluster that includes curse effect, curse duration, curse area, curse cast speed. Pretty interesting stuff. Curses by default in the new patch are going to be weaker. They have been sort of all been nerfed a little bit, but the addition of these curse effect clusters means that if you want to spec a support character, you want to make a very heavy cursing character or use a lot of curses, then you can invest in the passive skill tree to do that. So there are a few different things like that. I think we can probably look for the other one in here. Hex Master is all the way down here in a little tiny 3 cluster with curse effect, curse cast speed, and Hex Master, which gives 100% increased curse duration. Different to previous, not permanent curses, so no permacurse anymore. This is instead doubling the duration of the curses, so a little bit different there. Now let's just go through some of the other cool things in Witch. There's a lot of things throughout both the Witch, Shadow, and Outer Range area of the tree that have been changed so dramatically, and there's so many little changes that it would take many hours to go through each of them, so I'll let you guys browse at your own will, but I'll point out some of the things that I think are really cool. Firstly, the Witch area has been broken up a lot more into clusters, and you have a bit more options about how you tackle the Witch tree. You'll notice there's a lot of, different shapes and stuff going on in here, and essentially there's been a lot of things like, remember how there was crit chance here before? That's sort of been moved into a cluster, the split life and energy shield sort of area, life, mana, energy shield sort of clustering area of the Witch tree, that's been split into separate clusters as well. So for example, we have this cluster just here with the, a crit notable, we have the AoE cluster there with another notable, we have an energy shield cluster with a notable, we have a life and mana cluster with a notable, so there's a lot more split options there for you to route through. Or you can take the one you want and then go out, or you can sort of spend a lot more time in the Witch area if all of these are pretty attractive to you. If you're making like a crit flame blaster with Eldritch Battery, you're probably going to be going something like, I'll grab this crit node, I'll start here, I'll get the new Elemental Dominion node, which includes cast speed as well. Ooh, that's such a good looking node. I'll grab some of the fire, I'll grab some of the crit nodes here, I'll come across through, practical applications so I don't get interrupted while I'm casting. I'll grab the AoE nodes, I'll grab the ES nodes to help my Eldritch Battery, I'll grab the life and mana nodes. So there's a lot of time you can spend in each of these beginning areas, and you'll notice that a lot, that builds I think overall are going to take the shape of, instead of spending the tree a lot more, there'll still be some builds that do that. But a lot of the time, you're going to see builds that spend a lot more time in the start area or around this area of their class, maybe just spanning over into the next class over a little bit. So you remember this like jumbled up elemental mess that was kind of in the Witch area. We had some fire over here and we had some other mixed stuff all over the place, and there was random like clusters that, no one would ever visit. They've all sort of been, cleared out, spread out, and now we have this very efficient sort of looking highway across the top side here, which you can enter from the Eldritch Battery side. You can come through the life, you can come through the mana, you can go through the energy shield cluster here, or you can go through the power charge if you're playing crit build. Lots of different options for routing this area now, and it feels and looks a lot more efficient. And we now have like 3 different elemental clusters up the top here, which are quite interesting. So the fire damage cluster splits up in one side, which has a bunch of fire damage, and then damage penetrates 2% fire resistance, so it's got a 2% fire pen on that. So that's like the pure damage side of the fire tree. And then if we want to go for an ignite build instead, we have this side of the cluster here, so you can go up into here, get the ignite duration, ignite chance, fire damage, and then the notable there that includes, ignite duration, chance to ignite, and stuff like that. So you kind of have a bit of an option about exactly what sort of fire character you're building, and the same goes for each of these trees. There's the pure damage lightning side with lightning pen, then there is the shock chance side with shock duration and such, and the same thing with ice again. We've got freeze and freeze duration, and then just pure damage and cold pen as well. Next up we have the very, very attractive Shadow overhaul. Shadow's been redesigned, perhaps even more so than the Witch. Like, it doesn't look as dramatic a change, but I feel like as a class he's changed much more. He's become much more thematic, and feels a lot more what I would expect a Shadow to be now. So rather than having a choice of attacks or spells, which kind of meant the Shadow was often a sub subpar choice in my opinion. When I was playing a spellcaster, I was like, why choose a shadow when I can choose a witch and get very efficient pathing through both sides of the spell-related nodes? Now, as a shadow, you have instead a choice of elemental or physical. So it can be spellcaster or melee or bows or whatever you want, but you have the choice between that elemental and physical. And then in terms of thematic choices, he even now has things like life leech in addition to his previous mana leech. So very much feels a lot more like what I imagine the shadow to be, and very, very cool stuff here. So firstly, this is EK heaven. This is Ethereal Knives heaven. Ethereal Knives has gotten such a massive buff in this patch, and I'll kind of go over some of the things in here because it's very related to the shadow. Shadow will be the dominant EK class for sure. But starting off just here, we have physical damage. Pure physical damage works with spells, attacks, bows, anything you want. This physical damage works with everything. And look at this. You go all the way through all this physical damage. Now you have the cast speed, attack speed node. Then it goes straight into projectile damage and projectile speed. Oh, so good. And then you come down in here and you'll notice quickness also has 20% physical damage and move speed on it. Now this is a bit of a theming thing you'll notice as well. You'll notice this especially in the ranger area. A lot of nodes have move speed in them randomly, like they're kind of split hybrid, attack speed, move speed, whatever else, other thing, and move speed. This is a nice change for the game, I think, because fast-moving characters are fun to play, and just putting a lot of extra move speed sort of sprinkled around the tree that you'll get anyway because it's otherwise good nodes, and not many people pick up pure move speed nodes, so sprinkling them into other nodes is a very good choice, and we now are going to get a lot more move speed on our characters. So you'll see this, like, this EK dream just here going through all the way, just this top cluster just here, just bam, bam, through the fizz, through the projectile speed, and that is in addition to the ranger projectile speed, which you can still duck down and get as well, so 30% total speed now. And then a pretty nice looking cluster over here as well. Piercing shots has been changed. It now works with any projectiles. So this gives projectile damage on the left hand side here, the more efficient side, and then you've got the longer side here which has projectile piercing, and then there's the 30% pierce. So 40% total pierce from this cluster just here over in the shadow area. Now this obviously works with Ethereal Knives, very nice with Ethereal Knives for those larger packs, and it also works with any other spells or attacks you want. So this is going to work with Ice Spear and things like that as well, and I know a lot of Ice Spear people are getting pretty excited about this change. A few other cool things about the shadow area, because I've been playing around with this character quite a bit, sort of planning out different EK characters and things like that. We now have, so things like Static Blows, for example, or Arcing Blows, not Static Blows, now has been turned into a cluster instead with extra weapon damage, extra lightning damage, so you can go into that. We've got Trickery just here, includes elemental damage, crit strike chance, intelligence. We've got Cold-Hearted Calculation here, which is spell damage, mana regeneration, melee damage, intelligence. So this is a good node for just about anyone. If you're playing a crit build, I did a lot of like crit EK routing where I'd go all the way through here, come up through all these nice crit nodes here. We've got Assassination, a bunch of pretty nice crit nodes, you know, all 20% crit chance are pretty good nodes, and then straight into Cold-Hearted Calculation, which gives you either spell or melee damage. It's relevant for whatever character, and then it's got the 20% mana regen, which is often very nice to get. And you'll notice there's been a lot of extra mana nodes, mana-related nodes chucked around the tree, and we'll get into that a little bit. Now you'll notice there's like this accuracy cluster here as well, which includes crit strike chance, and you'll notice there's a fair bit of this going on around the tree, not necessarily accuracy and crit strike, but accuracy and another thing. So like move speed, which was not very attractive to get, accuracy is something that a lot of builds need, but wasn't very attractive. They've made it more attractive by combining with other things now, and you'll see a fair few different examples of this around the tree. We've got accuracy and attack speed just down here. We've got accuracy and elemental resistances here, sort of like a hybrid defensive cluster. Pretty interesting stuff all around the tree, sort of spread out now, and a lot of that sort of accessible to the ranger especially, which needs it a lot. So as I said, the ranger out area has received a lot of attention as well. This inside area here is a relatively pretty much the same thing, but we now have all of this outside area has been changed quite a bit, and even sort of down into duelist here, and a lot through the middle as well, sort of in between the shadow scion, ranger scion, duelist scion sort of area. There's been a lot of changes around there. So the heavy draw, deadly draw cluster has been moved over to the right-hand side here and changed quite a bit. We have, like I said, these combined accuracy attack speed nodes, which are pretty attractive. We have a nice trap cluster just down here. We have a similar sort of thing happening with this brutal blade slashing combat cluster, very similar to the deadly draw, heavy draw cluster. We have some nice crit stuff just in here. We've got lethality. We've got, obviously, you can head up into the projectile piercing shots and all of that jazz, same as before. No real changes to acrobatics. That stuff's all the same. We now have this evasion cluster just here, which is evasion and elemental resistances, gives a little bit of base, all resist, and then survivalist, which is +1 to maximum cold resist. I'll get into this sort of change a little bit later because it's pretty relevant to something else. But we also have some things like these combined life herbalism clusters now, so that's a bit more of an attractive option because it's actually a good life cluster. 20% total life is pretty good on this new passive tree, so you get the flask effect nodes with that as well, which works kind of nicely with an evasion-based character. What was known as celerity before is now down here and is now an evasion cluster with bonus move speed on it, so you can see 9% total move speed with pretty good evasion totals on it as well, so another option for getting good evasion. The thick skin has had its life lowered by quite a lot, but now has chance to avoid elemental status ailments, but this life lowering is in theme with a lot of other changes on the tree. This is one I really like here. Quick step here has attack speed and move speed, so instead of pathing through just the plain old move speed nodes now, which were kind of boring before, then it's now actually a pretty decent attack speed cluster as well, so you can make a faster character all around, which is quite attractive. But overall, just like from playing around with a bunch of different bow characters, both crit and non-crit, this is a much more attractive looking tree. There's just so many good options and good clusters. As I'm heading through, I want to pick up for 3 points Master Fletcher just here, which is really nice. There's a really nice crit cluster up here. There's, both the sides of the heavy draw and deadly draw are pretty attractive if you're heading down that outside of the tree there on an evasion-based character. Lethality is really good. We now have King of the Hill, which has a huge amount of crit strike chance on it, but knocks back enemies with a critical strike with a bow, so this will be a bit more of a decision, but has some interesting synergies with some stuff I'm playing around with a Trapper as well. So that part I'm kind of interested in, making like a puncture bow trapper with King of the Hill with the knockback is something I'm a little bit interested in, but we'll talk more about that in the future. But just a lot of sort of reshuffling and regrouping and just making all of the clusters so much more attractive. I'm really a big fan of a lot of these changes. Now, another really big change has been the attention to mana on the passive tree. I think ZiggyD are trying to move away from making Eldritch Battery or Blood Magic mandatory, which is a fantastic change. Firstly, we know that they're reducing the mana costs on a lot of skills, but they've also added in a lot of extra mana clusters, tied mana into a lot of extra things. So for example, the Mind Drinker node has mana. There's a lot more mana regen sort of around on other interesting nodes, like Cold Hearted Calculation has mana regen. There's a lot more attractive mana choices all across the board. But then on top of that, there's some other choices like things like mana on kill. So let's see if I can search this here to bring this up for you guys. Okay, here you go. So searching mana gained brings us all this cluster just here is mana gained on killing blow. There's also a mana gained for each enemy hit by your attack. It's going to be pretty attractive for things like cast on crit characters. We've got another mana gained on hit, just mana gained on kill just here. So there's a lot more of that now, which can ease some mana problems for some skills. We've got another mana gained on kill just there. So there's other options for gaining mana for your character, as well as there's some like more flask effect nodes and things like that, and flask duration and mana flask nodes and things like that. So there's more options now for building a mana-based character without taking Eldritch Battery. And based on a couple of the builds I've planned out so far, a couple bow builds and stuff, I've been able to take it and feel like, yeah, I've got a lot of mana on this character, and if they're also reducing the mana cost of the skills I'm going to be using, then I probably won't need to go for Eldritch Battery in this character. I can save a lot of points that way, spend more points on interesting things that make sense in the build. So that feels like a pretty good change overall. It'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out, but there's now a lot of alternative ways to build your characters, so it's not pretty much Eldritch Battery or bust. Life has been changed dramatically. The amount of life on the passive tree has been reduced significantly. You'll notice that a lot of life clusters have a lot less life. This used to have 18% on thick skin, for example. It's now 10%, 4% nodes, even 3% life nodes are really not that uncommon now. 6% is considered quite good, and this node just here, Constitution, is like one of the best on the tree. 14% max life is insane. As a side effect of this, the Scion life wheel is again very, very good, like it was once in the past. It was perhaps a little bit over-nerfed in the past, but now if you want to build a life stacking character, you need to invest quite a bit more in that and go into the life wheel in the Scion. But overall, there's a lot less life across the tree. Now, the reason for this is that they reduced the amount of, or they increased the amount of life you get per level as characters. So previously it was 8 per level. Now it's 12 per level. So the idea is that you'll end up with about the same amount of life for about the same amount of passive point investment, maybe even a little bit less, but builds are looking at something like 150 to 170, maybe 180% for a very hardcore oriented character, and a bit less than 150% for a softcore oriented character. But as I said, I'll make a bit more of a detailed guide about how much life you need to build your characters in the next expansion in another video, because that requires a bit of talking about. But just so you guys are aware what's going on with that. Why is life being nerfed so much? Not actually much of a life nerf, really, just kind of more of a change of the style of building your characters that ZiggyD wants to do. And the overall feeling for this is that from the characters I've planned so far, it has felt a bit more interesting. I'm getting life on interesting hybrid nodes, I'm getting other things at the same time. Not getting as much life on the tree, but still spending about the same or a little bit less than I was on previous characters. But instead I'm starting to think about as well other forms of defense, which is probably a pretty good thing. And then the final thing I want to note is kind of the death of Righteous Fire. Not specifically. Righteous Fire will still be able to be built, but it's going to take a bit more investment, it's going to be harder, and this is all thanks to the removal of the vast majority of the maximum resist nodes from the tree. So you'll notice that previously there was a 2% max resist over here somewhere. That is now completely gone. And the Marauder area does also not have maximum resistance, so you'll notice these are just pure resist nodes. I kind of like these nodes, so it's a little bit sad, but I guess this has always been a bit of a balancing issue for ZiggyD, and they wanted to just cut out a lot of these. Now, there are still some maximum resistances across the tree, but they are literally across the tree from each other. They are well and truly spread out, more thematic to where you would expect to find them on the tree, and obviously a nice things to get, but not something that a builder's going to always get, you know, all of those nodes if possible. Like Templars and Marauders are not always going to be getting all the max resistances, and building your Righteous Fire character is going to be a little bit harder. As a side note, there is more mana regen on the tree, so it will still be possible, but I don't expect to see many Righteous Fire characters in the next league. But anyway, let's take a look at these max resist nodes. Firstly, we have Barbarism, which has 1% extra max fire resist. Now this is on top of a very nice life cluster. This 6, 6, and 8% here is a very, very nice life cluster in this current tree, and it comes with extra fire resist and extra maximum fire resist, so more of a thematic thing than anything else. Still obviously makes a bit of a difference. 1% max fire resist still makes a big difference in your defensive capabilities against that element, but it's not a huge thing like the 2%, like the 4% you could previously get. Lightning is now up here on top of Unnatural Calm, so if you're playing an Energy Shield character, you'll be able to get that as well, and that's tied into that notable just there. And then finally we have Ice is tied into down here. We have Survivalist, which is on an Evasion, All Resist, Maximum Cold Resist node just there. So these are pretty nice nodes and pretty nice clusters that a lot of builds will get, but it's not a big thing from the passive tree now to be getting maximum resistances. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this overview. Let me know what you think about the new passive skill tree. I'm pretty hyped to be building characters on this thing, but it is kind of scary. I don't even know where to begin on a lot of these builds. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.